Hello, I'm Akin Grimes, or Air if you prefer.
I am Jarika.
And I'm Embers Tide, or Embers.
And I'm Jay, and this is Insight Check, an advice show where we delve into the dungeon of your bad decisions and retrieve the treasure of wisdom. And this is Embers, our dear friend who has managed to surmount all of the clamor to get into our game. We finally allowed someone else to enter this illustrious fold.
There are literally thousands of corpses laying at my feet, all of whom would have killed to be here.
Yeah.
No, I showed up on time in the place they told me to come to, and there were just all these corpses. So I'm gonna go with it.
This is what happens when you take someone as great as Haley away and just make it 3 boys.
I was going to say, we asked you to show us your credentials, and you're like, can't you see all these bodies?
For the Saccharin nightcap, all these corpses are stuffed animals.
Jarika, can you save us from ourselves by taking us into Dungeon Crawl?
The first thing that I'm super excited about in the world of D&D and tabletop gaming is Commander Holly, or Holly Conrad's new show called The Friendly Table, which is premiering very soon. We highly anticipate the content in the show is going to be pretty great. I know for sure because the art for it is a pigeon with a witch hat on a horde of multicolored dice behind a DM screen. What could go wrong? So it premieres, the first episode is on November 30th. And it will be on her YouTube channel, which is Commander Holly. I am super excited for this. To segue right into the Waffle Crew number 2, Jared Knabenauer has been pushing DN December 2017. So that's hashtag DNDECEMBER 2017. Scarlet Moth has provided us and Jared with a lovely list of prompts for arts or creative activities. Some of my favorites are Favorite Villain, Oddities, Sigil Planar, Mimic Trap, and Forbidden Knowledge. So I'm super excited to follow the December 2017 hashtag as all that lovely, lovely arts comes rolling out.
I think that's such a great idea. I think it's a great counterweight to what is becoming an increasingly, I guess, somewhat technical, somewhat rules first, somewhat expertise rewarding world of live podcasts or recommendation shows, or the culture as a whole. So I think something the total opposite of that is helpful, because as Chris Perkins said on Twitter today, this was D&D's biggest year in 20. And to keep that going, I think it's really important to find a portal in for people who are new, interested, but coming from no experience and maybe feeling some intimidation.
I do have one more dungeon crawl. I know. But Will Wheaton of, the internet, has done a great blog entry on his blog, which is willwheaton.net, WILWHEATON.net. The theme of this blog post is, what's the best entry point for Dungeons and Dragons? And he asserts that he's been playing since 1983, which is before I was alive. So he knows everything, and he gives a lot of really good suggestions about, if you're not sure it's for you, what you should start with and things like that. So I highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah, so I have something old and something new. I don't know what it is, but I have fallen down the rabbit hole. Actually, no, that's a lie. I know exactly what it is. It's because a certain DM who was running an awesome game for me and a few excellent colleagues threw a major boss battle at us using a 3.5 edition monster who, from what I understand, is not in 5th edition. And that sent me...
Sounds like a real a-hole.
He did kill me. So there's, grain of salt, there's a little bad blood there. Specifically, all of my blood that exited my body, and then I died. But things turned out okay in the end. it sent me down this rabbit hole of old discontinued D&D monsters, like things like the roving mauler, things like the golem of dirty clothes, things like the lurkers who became the dark mantles, but before they were that, they were the piercers, the lurkers, and the executioner's hoods. Like going back into the mythology of this game, which I started playing, I guess, in whatever year it was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it was the weird second edition where they split regular and advanced before Wizards of the Coast bottom and all that good stuff. And if you look back at some of like the lineage of them, they're not like, they seem really weird. Like a lion that's just a head and has 6 legs and is a captain of hell. That actually was like the 16th century demon from a very specific ancient culture mythology. I had no idea, but I've really been enjoying it. And if someone's into that kind of demonology and how it traces back through the lifelines of D&D, there's some interesting stuff there. And it's a nice mind to pull from, I guess, if you're planning adventures, planning battles, and you want to throw something, a little bit of kind of a curveball at players who are very used to more recent history and more recent monster manual kind of stuff. There's a lot out there, and I was impressed with that and excited by that.
Now, Embers, you've been stringing me along. Tell me what the name of this beast is.
Oh, the Beast of Malar. It was a giant shape-shifting.
What was the name of the beast that did you?
Hey, like I said, this sent me down a rabbit hole, so I tried to keep my track of breadcrumbs so I could walk my way back, hopefully, someday. Yeah, it was a shape-shifting beast. It had 3 forms. Each form was a big old bucket of hit points. Each form had unique attacks. It could turn into a bat and strafe a party. It could be a bear with some pretty tremendous damage power. I didn't see that much of it because, fortunately, my teammates picked up my corpse and took care of the boss at that point. It also was this kind of so if you can imagine a panther in your mind, also think about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And if you combine those two things,
I can't ever stop thinking about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Same. It's a problem sometimes.
Shake it off, Embers. Shake it off.
Like I'm at the grocery store and I'm supposed to buy milk, and I'm always thinking like,
and then I somehow come home with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
What is The Rock cooking?
Can you smell it?
And no, all I smell is dairy. Did you even get bread? No, because it's not my cheat meal.
I got Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
No, but so that's the something old. The something new, I'd have to say, is a kind of being a fairly intensive Acquisitions Incorporated C-Team fan, understanding, well...
I've heard about
None
that
of
show.
us are like that here. How dare you?
Soft intro, guys. Soft intro.
Yeah, what's a C team? How about the A and the B team? Where are those?
How much time do we have? Oh, my God. So once C-Team's first season ended... you kind of had to assume that all of these super passionate, clever, creative people were going to keep doing something, but we're going to get that itch of no new weekly podcast or live stream to go to. And in the course of like 24 hours, what I was kind of excited about, kind of dreading, happened, and you had about a dozen NPCs pop out on Twitter.
Name some. List them for me, Embers.
Give me names. So I think it's all of the standard NPCs you'd expect. Like there's the love interest of one of the main characters, Brahmaludier. There's one of the fan favorites, Trevor the werewolf, who's now running an inn after kind of coming to peace with himself. There is an ass-obsessed artiste who is a very small bit character, but colorful. And there are a few that I'm still waiting to see pop out. But
who's top of the list for you?
Top 3 for me, I'll give you number 1 right now. Sweet Wheezy.
Sweet Wheezy.
I don't know. That encroaches on the territory of player characters, which we
it does.
have avoided so far.
I get it. You're absolutely right. I just want a McBweezy account who just post pictures of cute weasels. Nothing else.
That's fair. That's very
maybe
fair.
with berets.
Dialogue.
All right, I'm gonna
Weasels
have to
with
put a
berets?
hard. I'm gonna have to put a hard limit on this conversation though, because we've been told we're a little insular, and this is as insular as it gets.
You're right.
These accounts are like roleplay accounts, right?
Yeah, and so there's the good and the bad, right? The good is it's a way for fans to kind of cosplay on Twitter, and there's something great about that. The downside is there can only be one of them. It is not sanctioned by the Penny Arcade, Megacorp, Alyssa, Jerry, and all of them.
Oh,
So
it's okay. That's okay.
You gotta kind of always have a sense of you're wearing the skin of this character that someone else created, and there's a certain responsibility to that, I feel. But
Yeah.
so far, it seems like the content is great, and so I'm very excited for seeing that until season 2 kicks in.
This really spoke to me because the reason why I created my Twitter account the way I did is because I was missing playing my druid character. So I was like, how can she live on? And I was like, oh, Twitter, of course.
Yeah, I think Jerry said something very pertinent to this, which was just that there's no finite supply of art. Somebody asked him, does my C-Team fan art dilute the brand? And he said, no, your fan art, your fan works, your fan fictions, they're fine. There's no finite supply of art. If your stuff is better than what we produce, if you've managed to produce something even better than what I can, it's just going to crank people up for our thing. And they're eventually going to make their way to the original. He's like, as long as you're doing it out of a love for the original property, then there's no finite supply of art. And I think that's a very informed way to look at it. So this is just another way of being a fan.
Yeah.
And trust me, roleplay accounts on Twitter are as old as Twitter.
Oh yeah, you're so right. You're so right.
So, Air, we wanted to find an excuse to talk about Matt Colville again, right?
I will take any opportunity, yeah.
I heard that's what this podcast was really about.
It's a C-Team fan cast that's also a Matt Colville fan cast.
Wrapped in a colorful candy shell.
So you have to there's layers going on here. We pretend to answer questions so that we can have a C-Team fan cast.
I'm seeing this nerd Venn diagram in my head, and it's amazing.
It's very complicated. It's the 3-dimensional shape.
Well, really, we could save a lot of time by just being like, here's a question, and then being like, oh, Matt Colville has a good answer to that. Go Google it.
There you go. So I wanted to talk about his amazing comic, the Critical Role comic, which he's been putting out 3 issues in now.
Yes.
Listen, if you're a DM, the dream scenario that your campaign is so cool that someday it gets made into a comic. I mean, that is buck wild. Like, the idea that you sat down at this table to roll dice with your friends, and then 5 years later, somebody is creating a mythic version of those events that they are then enshrining in this comic forever. Just absolutely radical. And these comics are so good. The dialogue is snappy. They're very funny. The art is gorgeous. There's been some complaint about the panel layouts, but apparently in issue 4, they brought on a comics panel layout artist whose specific job is just making those layouts more dynamic. The only one I've heard complaining about it is Matt Colville himself, saying that he didn't feel like his layout was very dynamic. But everybody else has just had nothing but good things to say about this comic, and for good reason. It is so funny. The songs that Scanlan the Bard, when Scanlan the Bard casts magic, he actually still references real world music even in the comic. It's fun to go back through the issues and try and figure out which song that Matt is parodying in each spell casting.
What kind of bard does that?
Gosh, I don't know. I can't stop thinking about how good this stupid comic is. I just read issue 3 today. It just came out. I'm sorry, it came out 6 days ago. Excuse me, I have to remember that we're time warped. But it's incredibly good, super engaging. Apparently the next one's going to be even better, and the team is finally getting together, if I can give you slight spoilers. So if you're into Critical Role, you should really be checking out this comic already. I mean, if you're watching this, I'm sure you already have. But yeah, Air, you were wanting to talk about something else?
Yeah, so we had mentioned a recent video he'd done, and in passing mentioned his Running the Game series, which kicked off his YouTube DM advice career. And so I know one of our dear members who couldn't be with us tonight, Haley, has been going through it and telling me about how much she's been enjoying it. And she reminded me about one of the videos that he recorded early on that I thought was very useful in a larger sense than just what are the rules, how do I get into role-playing a character, but more so about the sociology of D&D and getting back to the theme of how to incorporate new players. And he talks about the tropes of the assumed fantasy world we're all going into, because D&D is built upon the same thematic archetypes of all fantasy, and in that it is very cis, it is very het, it is very white, and it is very male. And so he's saying, fortunately, it has started to spread to a much wider audience than suburban teenage boys, and in that, you need to make sure as a DM that your world contains a fantasy for more than just cis-het white men. That it contains opportunities for people to find themselves or people that remind them of themselves in your world. And I thought it was really engaging, and it was it's called The Sociology of D&D is the name of the video, and it's a good watch for any DM, but it's a really good watch for any DM who's starting a campaign and knows who is coming to their table and can try to be empathetic to what those players might want out of the game.
And I think it's such an important element if you're trying to make your world, which they're going to visit for one brief period every week or month or whatever it is, to be enriching, engaging, and relevant, right? And not feel like every, tacky Hallmark movie, no offense, Hallmark, that doesn't necessarily depict like life in all of its spectrum.
Absolutely. But on that note, you know what, Hallmark? Fuck you. I know, I'm sorry. I take that back, Hallmark. I take it back. Expect a very sweet, non-offensive card sometime.
But it won't be your card.
All right. Occasionally on this show, we answer questions, and now is one of those times. So, welcome to the question segment of the show. Embers, are you ready?
Oh, theme music, sorry.
Is that the question section of the show? Then yes.
I didn't realize this would be so easy.
I don't know how much legs this question has, but I wanted to present it to you all because I thought it might be a good way to loosen up as we get into the question segment of the show. Weekly question thread number 132, Blood Mage Dragonborner, has asked, is metagaming a sin?
Well, from a meta perspective, I think almost everything I enjoy in life has been called a sin by somebody. So
listen, we all know
my question answer might be skewed.
Yeah, we all know that D&D is that spooky hell game that gets you sent to the devil dimension. But is other parts of the game, besides giving you real magic that you can use in real life, are other parts of the game also sins? Metagaming.
I have a vision of a redo of 7 where metagaming is one of the deadly sins, and the answer to what is in the box is not your character knowledge.
Metagaming is definitely a sin because I've done it. That's how I tell these days.
Yeah, I've done all the sin, and that's the thing I've done, so it must be.
It was on my sin list.
I've done only the best sins, yeah.
Only the best sins.
Sin it to win it.
Sin it to win it.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. Well, I knew that this question didn't have a whole lot of legs, but I could not have imagined the incredible reach it would have.
So to give my best serious answer, I think that metagaming is objectively not a sin. I think that the act of metagaming can be appropriate or inappropriate, can be constructive or destructive to a game, entirely based on the relationship between the player and the DM. And my perspective is if you're sharing the way you're telling the story, that may help enrich the story. It's so contextual
But
to me.
I think that sometimes you get real stuck in D&D, and one way to get unstuck is to talk things through. And explaining what you think you know and what the character knows, I think it helps people play the game.
Yeah, and ultimately, you can't separate the real physical human being that you actually inhabit and the fictional creature that you pretend to be for several hours every week. they are inherently linked because they are both aspects of you. You know things outside of the game. And so that's going to color your decisions in the game. Like when Air knew that there was an Aboleth, and he knew Aboleths were incredibly bad news, he immediately started telling everyone, we need to come at this from sideways. We don't need to come at this head on. We don't need to challenge this guy. And the other players in the group maybe didn't know how strong an Aboleth was. But because Air had that meta knowledge in the game, in the fiction of the world, he was able to contextualize the encounter as being too challenging for the group in their current condition. That painted the entire rest of the encounter. It amplified the terror in the other players. It actually made the encounter much scarier because he was creating this sense of dread because he himself, in the real world, was scared that this monster was too strong. And it translated into the game to make the other players and their characters thereby more cautious and more... metagaming is not a sin. It's just a part of the game. If you do it too much, if you do it to gain an unfair advantage, if you do it to screw your boss, then yeah, it's not going to be fun. Like I had a player in my game come at me just the other day and tell me that he knew how this encounter would end because he'd read it in the book. He'd bought Tomb of Annihilation and read all of Tomb of Annihilation. And he told me that he knew how this, he was literally telling the other players at the table, hey, you don't want to piss off this character, they could kill us. And I was like, that's not
so frustrating.
That's not cool. Like that's actually bad. Yeah. You shouldn't do that. And you definitely shouldn't advertise to the DM that you did that. But anyway, so metagaming is not a sin, but being a douche is always a sin.
Yes, indeed.
And the last point I'll make is based on what I see in social media, I shouldn't have to worry because metagaming is only something that girls do. And girls are bad.
Whoa!
Say it again to my face, Embers. Right in this face haunch.
Say it right into the face of the Queen of Murder. See how that goes for you.
Yes.
Hello, Embers. How are you today, Embers?
Well, I'm going on to the next question. Weekly question thread 132. Dragon from Hell says, should I, as the DM, have a character? I like feeling of having no DM screen and joining the fun, but even more being connected with my players. Is there any good way to do it?
No.
Have all the characters? Why would you limit yourself to one
listen here,
body?
Anne. I don't exactly agree with what you're saying.
I love the voice that you disagree with me. It almost sounds like your own DM PC, who my PC has a burning hate on against.
So is DM PC different than NPC?
A DM PC has a pretty negative connotation. It's this idea of the DM joining the party with their really cool character, Brickstone Darkshadow.
Off the
and
cuff.
Brickstone Darkshadow has a very important past, has the ultimate power hidden inside of them, and is actually central to the plot of the entire campaign. And Brickstone Darkshadow somehow always gets the final hit on every boss monster.
Right.
And so the stereotype of the DM PC is this character who kind of overshadows the players because the DM is playing them. They know all the answers to the puzzles, all the answers to the riddles, the correct way to approach every encounter, social situation, because they're the DM, and the DM has the answers to those.
I will, to get back to personal anecdote, I had mentioned that I started playing Dungeons & Dragons by being the DM for my group, and originally our other friend was going to do it, so I went, like any first-time player, creating that first character with thousands of words of backstory, meticulously selecting spells, and trying to come up with a fun concept, and then said friend was like, I don't know, this 5e thing there's a lot of new changes and blah blah blah. I was like, well, I've read the entire thing back to front, I'll just do it. Oh, I'm gonna miss my character. To which the friend said, well, why don't you play Best of Both Worlds? It is not, because I did exactly that. I made that character the central pillar of the entire campaign. I definitely tried to work in the backstories, and I was somewhat successful at that of the other characters, but this was the character that they first met, that got them on the first the quests for the first major arc, and at the end of it, when they fought Vecna at level 7, because I didn't know what I was doing, nor how powerful Vecna's supposed to be,
That That's incredible. No, that actually sounds fun. A level 7 Vecna is
I mean, they were all out of stuff. They were all out of spells. They were all out of hit dice. And they walk in, and they see Vecna half summoned through a portal by one of the other characters, Arch Nemesis, who's the head of the cult. And my DMPC walks up, blasts it with holy energy as the avatar of his god, and rejuvenates the entire party back to full so they can fight the leader of the cult. He was absolutely a deus ex machina.
Course.
He was the hero. He was DM. It's too tempting to have a main character of your own devising in the party, not to always use them as a way to make the party go and do what you want. I highly advise against it.
I am writing my magnum opus at the moment, which is a loose collection of D&D encounters. This is the first thing I've written. That's not true. I did some other stuff before, but so how, and there's characters that the party is going to encounter a lot, and characters that are going to know more than the party. How do you all suggest that I don't turn it into the Jiraika show?
Well, here's my tip on how to prevent the DMPC, or how to do the DMPC correct. And it basically boils down to this. If you put the DMPC in the party, it's bad. If the party picks the DMPC, it's okay. Which is to say, if you have an NPC in the world that the party really likes and they want that person to come on an adventure with them, then you're probably doing just fine. If you have a character that you have decided needs to go with the party full time or most of the time, then it's really probably not necessary. You probably need to figure out a way to make that character less central. Because ultimately, the story needs to be about the players, and then any character you send along with the players should be accentuating their story, or should be an element of their story, or should be something that they enjoy enough that they want to include it in their story.
I would say that the DMPC has the same reputation in tabletop role-playing that a Mary Sue character has in fiction. They are all too readily able to become the perfect personification of that person in a fictional world. But you're absolutely right. I would say, like in Critical Role, for example, Matt Mercer, the amazing DM for that show, had created a world ripe with characters that the party fell in love with, and oftentimes those characters would get recruited to go on adventures, but they always were interesting and intriguing, but they took a backseat to the main adventure of the main adventuring party. They were there to help. They were not there to steal the spotlight. And that's right. That's the way to do it.
Weekly question thread 132. Soggy Chewbacca asks, new DM, how to RP players traveling long distances? For example, the party wants to go to City X, that is a day's walk away. I feel like there should be something more than, okay, it's night now, and you're outside the gates. Should I roll on some kind of random encounter table to make it a little more interesting? So, this guy wants to know how to make travel interesting in Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome to the oldest question in Dungeons & Dragons.
I thought the oldest question was, what the hell is Thaco?
Well, Thaco didn't exist in the first edition, actually.
What is that?
cuts
Someone
deep.
tell me.
Actually.
Imagine AC, but it takes a master's degree in mathematics to figure out.
Gross.
Gross!
Dragon's like, I withdraw my question. That's just awful.
Yeah. Thaco is 2-hit armor class 0. It is a system by which you want to get your armor class as low as possible, and then you subtract the number that your armor class is from the number that you rolled to determine whether or not you hit. It is very cumbersome, but there are some really interesting charts that make it a little bit easier. But always rolling under a number is going to be harder than rolling over a number, and so we have the current REC.
That's what my mom
That is not
always
the question.
told me.
Your mom told you what?
It's harder to roll under a number than over, and I don't know.
I love.
Nope, you have to live and die on this joke now, Jerica, because you
Here's the
interrupted
deal, though.
for it.
I'm here to answer the question. So what was the question?
Trying to.
I just want to say there's nothing
right.
more mathematician than, wow, this seems really cumbersome. No, I have all these awesome charts.
But the charts are
Yes,
good.
Oh,
Anyway.
right. Yeah, travel interesting.
Oh, that's a great
right,
question.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
how to
Right.
make travel
Nice.
interesting. Travel is going to be as interesting as it is integral to the story. If travel does not add anything to your story, you don't need to make it interesting. You just need to make it believable. You need to make it. It just has to stay interesting enough for your characters to continue to believe in your world.
I remember a traveling scenario where we were in a caravan and we might have been going from like Baldur's Gate to Waterdeep or something like that. And we encountered both a meteor from Bahamut and a prince that was trapped in the body of an animal. That was probably the most interesting travel that I will ever experience in my living or dead life.
A funny thing happened on the way to Waterdeep.
We met a prince, and he was cute, and he was also not a human.
Was he an abhorsen?
I don't
Does he have abhorses?
don't know what
Sexy
you mean,
centaur.
Jay. But I read books.
I read books. I do so many readings a day.
So, yeah, Air, what do you think about travel?
Yeah, I think travel, making it so there's absolutely a time and a place. Like in a later campaign, I mean, there are spells and there are reasons to maybe jump having to travel from one town to another when it's something that's happened repeatedly. But early on, making the space between towns and villages and cities and encampments and settlements seem dangerous, seem like the whole 4E campaign was called the Points of Light campaign. Around there's bits of civilization and the rest is untamed wilderness filled with terror and magical beasties. And I think there's a certain element to that's nice to reflect in your game when players are traveling, perhaps early on, or if there's a reason to, like if you know, hey, you're going to make your way towards an enemy stronghold, perhaps there should be some encampments along the way where your players would get a chance to do some recon, maybe get some information, maybe fail a stealth roll or two and have to take out some of these forces. You always want to try to tailor it to the points of the narrative you're telling, but things like skill checks can be really good. So if you're doing skill challenges rather, if you're doing a series of traveling montages, it's not a bad idea to be like, okay, which character wants to take point and do a series of survival checks to see how long it's going to take you to move through this not civilized space. There's no roads. You're going to have to move through forest or jungle or some sort of thing. So you need some sort of survivalist person to guide you through. Who is going to be the person who is rationing food and provisions and setting up camps for the night, assuming this is a multi-day journey, and maybe they have to make some sort of check, maybe an investigation check or a nature check to find suitable grounds to make encampments for. And that can be up to your party and figuring out what skill checks make sense. But it's a good way to add some splitting potentialities into your travel wherein, you can use up resources or you can use up things. And then, of course, there is the inevitable, we want to camp for the night. Someone needs to take watch. This is why we take spells like Alarm or Leomund's Tiny Hut, so that we can sleep in relative peace surrounded by terrible monstrosities all around us.
I think it's any of these decisions, and this is one thing that can be overwhelming to some, and especially if you're relatively new to DMing, all of these are opportunities to build your world state and think through the different aspects of the world your players are occupying, traveling through, and what surrounds them. It helps to flesh out, make it more real. You don't always have to expound and build out around a travel, but it's an opportunity you can take and use it as you will, and what helps the story.
Absolutely. It's why I began our Moonshae Islands adventure with a storm and why I introduced the storm later in this campaign is too, it creates this sense that the world itself is dangerous in the Moonshae Islands.
You started that campaign with us bound and gagged.
Well, after that part, just to clarify, magically bound and gagged because they were trying to pass a test, because they were trying to gain entry into Acquisitions Incorporated, not for any other reasons. But anyway, Grub Life. Grub Life. Yes, so our heroes began with a terrible storm after gaining their freedom because it creates a sense of danger in the world, which I think is very interesting. But there's great ways to make weather and adventures about getting from point A to point B, if that's going to expand your world and make it more interesting. But is it fun to roll on the random encounter table every time your players leave town? Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe not necessary. Okay, let's do another one. Can you talk about playing against typecast? This is asked by Malvidian. Malvidian, who was originally a member of the F list.
Pour one out.
We see you.
We see you, Mal. Pouring one out for my fallen homie. Lost him to real life responsibility, that classic killer. But yeah, playing against type. So let's get to the very heart of this matter. Playing against the classic types of characters. So, you've got your dwarven cleric, stout, hardy, loves to drink, loves to wrestle and get in rumble. Got your drow, who's evil, malicious. But then against the stereotype, it may actually be more of that Drazit area where it's like, oh, I'm the rogue loner who's betrayed my clan and I'm so dark and edgy, but I'm such a good guy at heart. That kind of like story of like this very cliche existence that now exists in the drow type, despite it being completely against type for the drow.
I think it's almost, I wouldn't say it's almost a trope in and of itself, but it's like definitely a way to play that's not super surprising. Yeah. There's some good ones.
Well, first of all, before we go into this, I just want to say, there's nothing wrong with using stereotypes to make your characters, and this is no judgment on anybody who does.
Except it's boring. No, I'm just kidding.
But that being said, if you want to get outside of that box, here's some interesting character types off the top of our heads.
Real interested in this dwarf wizard idea. And wizards run on intelligence, I believe, is their spellcasting ability. And dwarves don't get any pluses. They have a +2 to Constitution, I believe.
Yep, and they can do either strength or whiz.
Yep, so int isn't in there at all.
Nope.
But the thing that intrigues me most about this combo is the Constitution +2, because Constitution's really important to spellcasters because it's what lets you maintain concentration when you're hit. And wizards tend to be real easy to hit. So I think that there are always ways to capitalize on different novel combinations of race and class, and not just in the stats blocks. Like, I feel like there's players that are focused on min-maxing, and there's players that aren't, and then there's like a whole swath in between. I fall way on the I'd rather RP it than care about the numbers. But that's a whole preface. I think that even if there wasn't any really obvious like synergy between the race and class you want to play, why do you want to play it? Like, there's something in there that's compelling to you, so figure out, try to tease it out for yourself.
Yeah, the academic halfling could be an interesting one.
I love the idea of like the tiefling druid. Like,
yeah,
really
tiefling loves nature.
I think Drekka makes a really good point. Like, there's the statistics of it, there's the math of the choices that you make and how it influences the way that the character plays and the advantages and disadvantages that they have. Those are different and novel. They can be good, they can be bad. That's cool. To me, personally, much more on the end of let the RP be the whole soul of the character and its experience. Like you, I think that mismatch, if it's based on a choice, if it's based on a story, it can be just endlessly interesting to me. I mean, selfishly to me. and exploring that and creating a whole world and life story around that. That's what I find super fun. And those are the characters I love to play with and read about.
Now the opinion of a min-maxer. Ayer, what do you think?
I was thinking about this recently because I was like, the racial selections in D&D, like they have gone to great lengths to be far more inclusive than they ever were before. Because as we mentioned earlier, D&D was seen as a cishet white boys club, and they've worked very hard to try to break down those boundaries. But then there's still these weird little earmarks of that former history that are there. It's kind of racist. Like, why is it that a dwarf is just naturally not going to be as intelligent as an elf? Like, there's absolutely no wiggle room for...
You can't be racist about fantasy creatures.
Maybe that's a strong term, but I was thinking about a homebrew where just, if you're with point buy, increase the number of points and set the cap to 16. Because I want to be able to play a dwarf wizard. I want to be able to play an orc sorcerer, but I don't want to be handicapped because they don't have the right stats. Because you can be a smart dwarf. You can be a charismatic orc. You can be...
That's the difference between you and me, Air. I just play it. I don't care about the handicap.
Yes, I see no reason why there should be stat allocations for race. I think that's silly, and I would be very happy to homebrew or house rule away.
But I mean, like, Hellish Rebuke for tieflings. Like, would you just give that to, I don't know, a halfling?
No, I think because those are absolutely flavor things, and I get that, like, orc big, strong, gets plus to strength and con. Like, I get that those are flavor things too, but then they mechanically alter the class in ways. So, like, halfling, the lucky feat, let them keep that, because halflings are notoriously able to get themselves out of jams by some twist of fate. So those flavor bits I think are absolutely great, but the stat bonuses I would completely do away with.
I don't know if I would. It's an interesting conversation, though, and it's certainly not something I've thought about before. For someone like you who is compelled to make sure that you have even numbers at the end of the day, and that your stats all add up to a modifier, that you can't have anything halfway between a modifier, I do understand why that would appeal to you. I would say that, for me, I think that there is maybe... In 4th edition and 3rd edition, it was a lot easier to get to 20 with your lower starting scores in your main stats, and you still got to pick a decent number of feats and interesting stuff. In 5th edition, you're basically either going to get some feats or get to 20, and you're not going to get both. You're never really going to get to 20 and have feats, the way 5th edition is basically designed. You can... I mean, unless you roll for stats. With point buy, you're never going to get to 20 and have feats. Maybe at 20th level. But if you're in most of your campaigns that are going to end by 11 or 12 or 14, you're never going to get to the point where you have, a selection of feats and a 20 stat. So you're definitely forced to make those really hard decisions a lot more in 5th edition, where it's like, do I want a +4 in my spellcasting ability modifier, or do I want this really cool Warcaster feat, which is going to help me do a lot of really interesting flavor things.
Feat all the way.
Yeah, feats are good. Feats are really good in 5th edition if you allow them in your games. But it makes the whole process of making your randomly assigned class a lot more difficult. Because now if you're talking about going from a 16, which is a +3 at level 1, to a 15, which is a +2, a +2 is not great. And the whole system's balanced around you being able to do a +5 to hit. And if you're only doing a +4 to hit, that's going to noticeably reduce the number of times that you hit with spells and abilities. And so you're kind of edged towards min-maxing your racing class a little bit more in 5th edition, I feel like.
Bounded accuracy makes even a +1 really matter, actually.
Yeah, a +1 really matters in 5th edition. And the way they discourage the gifting of magic items and the way they encourage...
But if my goal is to get that zinger in, or, really stick it to... the villain with the way I've done something, or I don't know, like produce a monologue that I've written for 3 weeks for my party. Like, I don't care if I can hit this Murfer.
MFer? Is that perhaps what you
sure.
meant to say?
Yeah.
I don't know, I like Murfer.
You can tell I know how to censor myself well.
No, it's fair. I mean, an RP decision is definitely valid, and it's certainly important to have the right motivation at heart when you make your character, and not just make it to make the most powerful character. But I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting your character to be competent in their core class, and I think that 5th edition makes it hard to balance those 3 things. Do I make a powerful character? Do I make a character for pure RP, or do I make a character that's a little bit of both? I don't know that there's room for a little bit of both in 5th edition like there was in previous editions.
I found that there is, though, and that's why I love it.
I think I'll just go to the eternal Jeff Goldblum on this one. Nature finds a way.
Ooh.
I mean, the game is insanely fun either way. It's not like it ruins anything. It's just like, I just get where the question asker is coming from, and I get where maybe Air is coming from, where it's like, these kind of playing against type characters, these characters that are balanced around not being, if you build a character that's not optimized for their race or class, then suddenly you're going to have a interesting role play opportunity that during combat becomes highly ineffectual.
Right. And
But I mean, we've talked in the past about, party composition, and part of the role of the DM, as we have stated, is to maybe identify where there's lacking and kind of fill that in.
If your DM is with you on this, they can definitely accommodate for the situation. Giving you a magical item with a bonus to a spellcasting ability that you may need help with, or something like that.
Exactamundo.
The only thing that I would say about that is that you have to make sure that you're in that kind of game if you're going to go outside the box, because there are, like Adventures League, in D&D Adventures League, you're not going to have those customized magic items that are specialized towards you. You're going to have to go off the standard rules. And in an Adventures League game, it really behooves you to make an optimized character.
That's true.
Because there's some real severity to what happens to your character if you fail at certain points.
Yeah.
I like the idea of like a dwarven wizard getting like a toque of elven kind, which increases intelligence by 2 or something. Thank you for listening to another episode of Insight Check. Be sure to check us out on @InsightCheckPod on the TweetSor. You can also find us at insightcheck.podbean.com and on iTunes. We, of course, want to thank Vince Vept for our amazing intro and outro music, and the amazing Amy T. Falcone for giving us the lovely avatars that adorn all of our various internet places. Please join us again next week, and until then...
If you enjoyed the show and you'd love to support us, please don't forget to leave a rating or comment on iTunes. It really helps out the show if you can rate us or review us there.
And as always, we've been answering your cues from our collective A's.
This
was
Insight
Check.
DM's impressive in Dungeons and Dragons.
They are the most impressive beings in existence.
Says you.